Snow fell silent on the cabin roof. Inside, one lamp burned one man, one child, one winter that had stretched 3 years too long. Jacob Hayes stood at the window, watching white descend on Montana. His daughter Ivy slept in the loft above, her breathing the only sound besides wind and crackling fire. Christmas Eve meant nothing to him now. Just another night. Another memory of what was lost. He moved through the evening ritual without thought. Banked the fire, checked the kindling box. Pour coffee he wouldn't drink. Sit in the chair opposite the one that stayed empty. Sarah's chair. 3 years since she'd sat there. Belly round with the child who never drew breath. 3 years since he'd watched her slip away. Powerless to stop it. The midwife said sometimes it just happens. God's will. The preacher claimed. Jacob stopped listening to both. Papa. Ivy's small voice from the loft made him turn. She peered down through the railings, dark hair tangled from sleep. What is it, little one? Will Mama come for Christmas? The question landed like a stone in still water. He'd learned to expect it, Ivy asked every few months, the intervals growing longer as memory faded. She'd been 3 when Sarah died, now 6, with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. Best get back to sleep now, he said, voice gentle but firm. Morning comes early. But Papa, sleep, Ivy. She disappeared back into her blankets. Jacob returned to the window, jaw tight. Out here. You either kept moving or the cold took you. He'd been standing still for 3 years. His hand rested on Sarah's chair back. The wood was smooth, worn by her touch in the years they'd had. Not enough years. Never enough. I'm trying. Sarah, he whispered to the empty room. But I don't know how to do this without you. Snow continued falling. The lamp burned low. Outside. The world was white and endless and alone. The knock came soft twice. Then silence. Jacob looked up from the stove where he was frying eggs. Ivy sat at the table with charcoal and paper, drawing horses the way he'd taught her. Christmas morning, and they'd not expected company. Out here, strangers meant trouble or need, often both. He opened the door to a woman covered in snow. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said, voice steady despite the cold. My horse went lame about 2 miles back. The storm came up faster than I expected. She was younger than him, late 20s, maybe. Dark hair plastered to her face, dress soaked through. But her eyes were clear, direct. A woman used to hardship. Storm catches everyone out here, Jacob said. He stepped back. Come in before you freeze. She entered carefully, as if aware she was intruding on something private. Ivy stared with open curiosity. I'm Grace Porter, the woman said. I was heading to my sister's homestead in Wyoming. Didn't plan on getting caught in this weather. Jacob Hayes. This is my daughter, Ivy. Ivy slid from her chair and approached Grace without fear. Are you going to stay for Christmas? Ivy, Jacob said, but Grace smiled. I don't mean to impose. If you could just point me toward the next town. Nearest town's 10 miles. Your horse won't make it, and neither will you. Jacob moved to the stove. Added more wood. Barn loft's warm enough. I'll see to your horse. Thank you. I can pay for the trouble. No need. A man's hospitality speaks louder than his words, and his silence speaks loudest of all. His father had taught him that. Grace noticed the bare cabin then. No decorations, no tree, no sign of Christmas except the date on the calendar. Her expression shifted, but she said nothing. I could help prepare a meal, she offered, as thanks for the shelter. Jacob wanted to refuse. Having someone in his space, touching Sarah's things, disrupting the careful order he'd built, had unsettled him, but Ivy's face lit up. "Can we have Christmas dinner? Papa like Mama used to make." He couldn't deny his daughter. "Not on Christmas, if you're willing," he said to Grace. Ivy took Grace's hand immediately, chattering about cookies and whether they had enough flour. Jacob watched from the doorway as they moved toward the kitchen. The sight of another woman in his home, Ivy holding her hand so naturally, made something twist in his chest. Fear and longing, all at once. He turned away, heading for the barn to tend Grace's horse. Better to keep moving. Better not to think about how empty the cabin would feel when she left. Grace moved through his kitchen like she'd always been there, not erasing Sarah's ghost, but somehow making room beside it. Jacob sat at the table with Ivy, watching. Grace had found Sarah's recipe book on the shelf, asked permission before opening it. The gesture moved him more than he'd expected. Most people tiptoed around Sarah's memory or ignored it completely. Grace simply acknowledged it existed. "Your wife was a fine cook," Grace said, scanning a page. "These recipes are detailed. She took care with things." "She did," Jacob managed. Dinner was simple roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar. But it was the first real meal they'd had in months. Jacob usually cooked enough to survive. Nothing more. Grace made it into something that felt like home. Ivy talked nonstop, asking Grace questions about her travels, her life before. Grace answered patiently. Her own questions gentle but probing. "How long since you celebrated Christmas?" she asked. Jacob looked down at his plate. Ivy answered for him. "Since Mama went to heaven. That was a long time ago." 3 years, Grace said quietly, understanding in her tone. After dinner, Grace helped Ivy prepare for bed. Jacob stood in the hallway, listening to her read a story in a voice that was warm, but not Sarah's. Never Sarah's. When Grace came down, she found him by the fire. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," she said without preamble. "Ranch accident. I've been traveling since then, trying to outrun the grief. Thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't feel it as much." Jacob looked at her. "Does it work?" "No." She sat in the chair across from him, Sarah's chair, though she couldn't know. Staying frozen doesn't honor them. Jacob, it just means they took our hearts when they left. "Maybe some hearts aren't meant to thaw." "Maybe," Grace said. "Or maybe we're just afraid of what happens if they do." The words sat heavy between them. Upstairs, Ivy stirred in her sleep. The fire crackled. Snow whispered against the windows. She died giving birth. Jacob said suddenly. The words came before he could stop them. "Second child." I encouraged it, even though the doctor warned us. I thought... His voice cracked. "I thought we'd be fine." Grace's expression softened. "You couldn't have known. I should have protected her." You can't protect anyone from everything, Jacob. Not even the people you love most. He wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at him. 3 years of carrying this weight alone. And here was someone who understood, someone who'd walked through the same fire. Grace stood. "I'll be gone in 2 days. When the storm clears and my horse recovers, you won't have to worry about an intruder in your grief much longer." The words stung more than they should have. That night, after Grace retreated to the barn loft, Jacob stood at Ivy's bedside. His daughter slept with Sarah's handkerchief clutched in her hand, the one piece of her mother she'd claimed as her own. The land don't lie, and neither does grief. You can bury it, but it still grows. He'd been burying it for 3 years. And Grace Porter, with her quiet understanding and gentle presence, had just started digging it back up. Sunlight broke through clouds for the first time in days, too bright, too sudden, exposing everything he'd tried to keep hidden in shadow. 3 days had passed. The storm finally broke, but Grace's horse still needed rest. The animal had a mild sprain, nothing serious, but it needed another week to heal properly. Jacob told himself he was relieved only because it meant not turning a woman out into the cold. He told himself that. But it was a lie. Grace had transformed the cabin in small ways. Herbs hung drying near the window sage and thyme she'd found in his neglected garden. She'd mended the torn curtain by the door, organized the pantry, swept corners he'd stopped noticing. Nothing dramatic, just evidence that someone cared about the space again. Ivy followed Grace everywhere, watched her braid herbs, helped her measure flour, listened to stories about places Ivy had never seen. His daughter smiled more in 3 days than she had in 3 years, and that terrified him. "Papa, Miss Grace is teaching me Mama's gingerbread recipe," Ivy announced, bouncing on her toes. Grace looked up from the recipe book, uncertain. "Only if your papa says it's all right to use her book." Jacob met her eyes across the room. She was asking permission for more than just recipes. Asking if it was acceptable to step into this space, to touch these memories, to exist in the places Sarah had occupied. "Sarah would have wanted her recipes used," he said quietly. "Not just kept," relief flickered across Grace's face. He escaped to the barn after that, grabbed an axe, and started splitting wood they didn't need. His breath came in clouds, his muscles burned, but physical pain was easier than the confusion churning inside him. Sometimes the bravest thing a cowboy can do is let someone help carry the load. His father's words again, echoing across years. But what happened when you let someone in and they left too? What happened when you gave your heart permission to feel again, and it got ripped away a second time that evening? The three of them sat at the table. Ivy chattered about the gingerbread, how it smelled just like she remembered. Grace laughed at something the child said. Jacob found himself smiling, really smiling for the first time in years. Then guilt crashed over him like cold water. Grace noticed. She always noticed. After Ivy went to bed, Jacob stood abruptly. "I need to check the animals." Jacob. But he was already gone, out into the darkness, chopping wood until his hands bled and his breath came ragged. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The stars offered no absolution, only silence and cold and the weight of promises he wasn't sure how to keep. The cabin held its breath between them, two wounded souls circling the question neither dared ask: what happens when we stop running from life? 5 days since Grace arrived. Ivy slept soundly above. The fire burned low, casting shadows that danced and merged. Jacob and Grace sat across from each other, the space between them filled with things unsaid. "I've been thinking," Grace began, voice soft, "about what I said before, about running." Jacob waited. "I thought if I kept moving, the grief couldn't catch me. New towns, new faces, never staying long enough to attach to anything." She stared at the fire. "But watching you and Ivy these past days, I realize I haven't been running from grief. I've been running from life itself. Staying still doesn't make it easier." Jacob said, "No, but at least you're here. You're present for your daughter, even when it hurts. I've just been absent from everything." The admission hung between them. Jacob felt something shift, a recognition that they were both trapped in the same prison, just different cells. "Tell me about her," Grace said. "About Sarah?" Most people avoided the topic. Grace walked straight toward it, so he told her. About Sarah's laugh, how it filled every corner of their small cabin. About her strength, the way she'd face down a rattlesnake or a difficult calving without flinching. About the way she sang while cooking, off-key, but joyful. She made this place home. Jacob said, "Without her, it's just a building. And you've been living in a building for 3 years. I've been surviving. There's a difference between surviving and living." "Jacob." He looked at her then, really looked. Grace's eyes held the same pain he carried, but something else too. A flicker of hope he'd thought was dead in himself. "I promised Sarah I'd keep Ivy safe," he said. but I don't know if I'm keeping her safe or keeping her lonely. Children need more than safety. Jacob, they need to see that love is stronger than loss. The words struck deep. He thought of Ivy, growing up in this shell of a home, learning that love meant endless grief and nothing more. Maybe the bravest thing, Grace continued, is teaching her that love doesn't end, it just grows in new directions. Your wife gave you 3 beautiful years. Are you going to let those 3 years take all the rest? Jacob had no answer. The truth of it was too large, too frightening. Grace stood, preparing to retreat to the barn. She paused at the door. Home ain't a place. It's the people you'd ride through hell to get back to. Maybe it's time to stop riding away. After she left, Jacob sat alone in the firelight. He pulled out a small wooden box from beneath his bed, Sarah's things. Letters she'd written, ribbons she'd worn, the wedding band he couldn't bring himself to bury with her. At the bottom, he found something he'd forgotten. A letter in Sarah's handwriting, addressed to him. If I don't survive, written on the outside. His hands shook as he opened it, but he couldn't read it. Not yet. The fear was too great. He closed the box and returned it to its hiding place. Heart pounding. Some truths were too heavy to face alone in the dark. Neighbors brought judgment wrapped in concern, the kind that cuts deeper than any Montana wind. The Brennans arrived mid-afternoon, ostensibly to drop off preserves. Thomas and Margaret Brennan, married 30 years, pillars of the small community. They took one look at Grace in Jacob's kitchen and their smiles became fixed. Didn't know you had company, Jacob, Thomas said, voice carefully neutral. Grace Porter. Her horse went lame. She's waiting for it to heal. Margaret's eyes swept the cabin, the organized shelves, the herbs drying, the evidence of a woman's touch. How long has she been here? Week or so. The Brennans exchanged glances. Grace, perceptive as always, excused herself to check on Ivy in the yard. Jacob, Margaret said once Grace was gone. We're not ones to judge, but people talk. Let them talk. It's awfully soon, Thomas added. Sarah's only been gone 3 years. And having an unmarried woman staying under your roof, in the barn, Jacob corrected, voice hardening. Even so, appearances matter, especially for Ivy's sake. The words hit their mark. Everything he did was for Ivy, and now they were suggesting he was failing her by showing basic hospitality. After the Brennans left, Jacob felt the walls closing in. By evening, word had spread. He knew how small towns worked. Gossip traveled faster than truth. People would be speculating, judging, counting the days Grace had stayed. When Grace came in for supper, he was cold. Mrs. Porter, I appreciate your help, but folks are talking. When your horse is ready, it's best you move on. Grace froze. Ivy, setting the table, looked between them, confused. I see, Grace said quietly. People have expectations out here. I won't have them thinking. Thinking what? Grace's voice was steady, but hurt flickered in her eyes. That you might dare to live again, that your daughter might have a chance at wholeness. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is letting fear and other people's opinions dictate how you live. But it's your life. Jacob, your choice. She turned and climbed to the loft, began gathering her few belongings. Ivy watched, tears streaming down her face. Papa, why is Miss Grace leaving? It's complicated, sweetheart. No, it's not. You're just scared. The accusation from his 6-year-old daughter stung worse than any adult judgment. That night, Ivy cried herself to sleep. Grace packed in silence. Jacob stood in the barn, staring at the fence line that separated his land from the small plot where Sarah was buried. A man's word is his bond, but fear can break both faster than any storm. He'd chosen fear, chosen safety over risk, isolation over connection, and in doing so, he'd hurt everyone, Grace, Ivy, himself. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering. He'd made his choice. Now he'd have to live with it. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that shows every mistake in sharp relief. Jacob woke before sunrise, knowing Grace would leave at first light. Her horse had recovered enough. There was no reason for her to stay. Not anymore. He told himself it was for the best, protecting them all from gossip, from complication, from the possibility of loss. But the words rang hollow even in his own mind. He was in the barn, avoiding the cabin, when Ivy found him. His daughter stood in the doorway, small frame silhouetted against the dawn. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him with eyes too old for 6 years. "Mama told me once that love makes more love," Ivy said finally. "She said hearts don't run out of room." Jacob's chest tightened. "Ivy, you think you're keeping her memory by staying sad? But Mama would be sad that you're teaching me love ends when people die." The words were a knife between his ribs. His daughter. Speaking truth he'd been running from for 3 years. "Miss Grace makes you smile. Papa, I see it. And you're telling her to go away." Ivy's voice cracked. "Mama wouldn't do that." Before Jacob could respond, horses approached. He stepped outside to see Henry and Martha Doyle, the elderly couple from the neighboring ranch. "Heard about the Brennans' visit," Martha said without preamble. "Came to set some things straight." Henry dismounted slowly, joints stiff. "I lost my first wife to fever 30 years back. Son, thought I'd die right alongside her. Couldn't imagine living, let alone loving again." He gestured to Martha. "Then this one came along. Took me 2 years to stop fighting it, to stop feeling guilty for every moment of happiness." Martha smiled. "Your Sarah loved you both. She'd want Ivy to know what a whole family feels like. And she'd want you to know you deserve happiness. Jacob, I have something for you," Martha continued, pulling an envelope from her coat. "Sarah gave this to me before Ivy was born. Made me promise to give it to you if things went wrong." Jacob's hands trembled as he took it. Sarah's handwriting. "For Jacob, if I don't come back." The old couple left him alone. He sat on the porch step, snow crunching under his boots, and finally opened the letter he'd been too afraid to read. "My dearest Jacob, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry for the pain that must bring you. But I need you to know something. Loving me wasn't a mistake, even if it ends in grief. The joy we had was worth whatever sorrow follows. Promise me you won't stop living. Promise me you'll find someone who'll love our Ivy as fiercely as I would have. Let yourself be loved again. My heart was big enough to love you forever. Yours is big enough to love again. Don't let fear win. Jacob, choose life, choose love, choose hope. Forever yours." Sarah Jacob's tears fell on the paper, smudging ink. His wife's final gift: permission to live, permission to love, permission to let go of the guilt that had chained him for 3 years. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stop running from life, from love, from the truth staring him in the face. He stood, letter clutched in his hand, and ran toward the barn. Grace was leading her horse out, saddlebags packed. She looked up at his approach, expression guarded. "Wait," Jacob said, breathless. "Please wait." He stood in the barn doorway, snow melting on his shoulders. Words he'd buried for 3 years finally clawing their way to light. Grace stopped, one hand on her horse's bridle. She didn't speak, just waited. "I was wrong," Jacob said. "About everything." He held up Sarah's letter, hands still shaking. "My wife wrote this before Ivy was born. I've been too afraid to read it until today. Too afraid of what it might say, what it might ask of me." Grace's expression softened, but she remained cautious. She'd been hurt, Trust wouldn't come easy. She asked me to choose life, Jacob continued, to let myself be loved again, to find someone who'd love Ivy. I thought honoring her meant staying frozen, trapped in the moment she died. But I wasn't honoring her. I was hiding. He stepped closer. I was terrified of losing again. So I chose not to live at all. I built walls around my heart and called it faithfulness. But it was just cowardice dressed up as loyalty. Jacob, let me finish. Please. He drew a breath. You came into our home like spring breaking winter. You honored Sarah's memory while showing me I could still have a future. You saw through my walls and waited patiently. And when I was finally starting to feel again, I pushed you away because some neighbors talked. Grace's eyes glistened. I'm not her, Jacob. I can never be Sarah. I don't want to be a replacement or a convenience. If I stay, you're not a replacement, Jacob interrupted. You're Grace Porter, the woman who repairs quilts without hiding them, who uses recipes without erasing their history, who shows a scared man that love doesn't replace, it expands. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cold. Stay, not just for Ivy, though she adores you, not just because the cabin's warmer with you in it. Stay for me. Stay for us. I know it's messy and imperfect. I'm still figuring out how to let go of guilt, but I'm asking you to stay and let me learn how to love again. Are you sure? Grace's voice wavered. Because I can't do this halfway. Jacob, I've been running for 2 years. If I stay, I'm staying for keeps. Then stay for keeps. His voice strengthened. Please. The barn was silent except for the horse shifting, snow falling outside. Grace looked at him, really looked, searching for doubt or hesitation. She found none. I'd like that, she said finally. I'd like that very much. Relief flooded through him. He almost pulled her close, but movement at the barn door stopped him. Ivy stood there, tears streaming down her face. Martha Doyle's hand on her shoulder. See, Ivy said, voice trembling with joy. 3 fits better than 2. Jacob opened one arm. Ivy ran to him, and he scooped her up. Grace's hand stayed in his. Love ain't about replacing what was lost. It's about having the courage to build something new on honest ground. Thank you, Sarah, Jacob whispered, looking at the gray sky. Thank you for loving us enough to let us go forward. Snow continued falling. But for the first time in 3 years, winter didn't feel like death. It felt like promise. The cabin held 3 chairs at the table, 3 stockings by the fire, 3 hearts beating as one. Winter still held the land, but inside, spring had already arrived. 3 weeks had passed since New Year's. Grace had stayed, woven herself into their life with the same gentle patience she'd shown from the beginning. Sarah's photographs remained on the mantel Grace had insisted. Her own touches appeared alongside Herb's drying. A new quilt on Ivy's bed. Laughter in rooms that had been silent too long. The transformation wasn't erasure, it was integration. Ivy flourished. The quiet, withdrawn child became bright and talkative. She taught Grace the games Sarah had taught her, and Grace taught Ivy new songs. The past and future lived together without conflict. Martha and Henry Doyle visited. Brought a welcome gift, a hand-carved sign that read, "The Hayes Home." Henry winked at Jacob. Figure it's time this place had a name worth speaking. Even the Brennans came, sheepish and apologetic. Margaret brought fresh bread, couldn't meet Jacob's eyes. We were wrong to judge. Anyone can see Ivy's thriving. That's what matters. Jacob accepted the peace offering with grace. Grudges were heavy to carry, and he'd put down enough weight already. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant orange and pink, Jacob and Grace stood on the porch. Ivy played in the snow, building what she insisted were snow angels for the family. Think we'll be all right? Grace asked. Jacob squeezed her hand. I think we're already better than all right. I think we're home. Look, Ivy called. I made 3 snow angels, one for each of us. The child's joy was pure, uncomplicated. She ran to them, face flushed from cold and happiness. They went inside as darkness fell. Grace lit the lamps while Jacob built up the fire. Ivy set the table, 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 places. She'd made a 4th stocking for Grace, decorated it with careful stitches, and hung it beside the others. Sarah's quilt lay folded on the rocking chair. Grace's herbs hung near the window. The recipe book sat open on the counter. Past and present, grief and joy, loss and love all occupying the same space without competition. After Ivy went to bed, Grace and Jacob sat by the fire. I keep waiting for it to feel strange, Grace said, being here, in another woman's home. But it doesn't. It's your home too now. Because you made room. You didn't ask me to pretend Sarah didn't exist. You let her stay while letting me in. Jacob nodded. She was part of my life. She's Ivy's mother. Forgetting her would be like forgetting how to breathe. But you're here now. And that's not betrayal. It's blessing. The fire crackled. Outside, the world was white and still. The bravest thing a man can do, Jacob said quietly, is love again after loss. And the wisest thing is to honor both the past and the future. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. Your father taught you that. My father, my wife, my daughter, and you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching flames dance above them. Ivy slept soundly. Around them, the cabin held warmth and life and hope. The lamp in the window burned steady, a beacon visible for miles across the snow. 3 silhouettes cast against the walls, a man, a woman, a child, a family. Not the family Jacob had planned, not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd found when he finally had the courage to stop running from life outside. Snow fell gentle. Stars emerged. The land stretched vast and cold and beautiful. And in one small cabin on the frontier, love multiplied instead of replacing. The lamp flickered once in the evening wind, then steadied, burning bright into the night. Where once there had been winter, now there was warmth. Where once there had been 1, now there were 3. And somewhere, in the spaces between earth and heaven, Sarah smiled. Her love multiplied, not replaced. Her family whole again. Spring would come, gardens would grow, life would continue, as it always did. But tonight, in this moment, 3 hearts found home, and that was miracle enough.